Hi. So again, this is a true story where all these are true stories. But in any event, I was sitting in my office one day minding my own business. This guy comes in to me and says, here's a check for $5,000. And I said, well, if we're going to start a case, it's not quite that simple. I have to understand who you are, what the situation is. Do I have conflicts? Do you have a good case? Give you an opinion on it. They understand the legal process, blah, 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 the usual stuff. He says, no, you don't have to do any of that. And I said, what do you mean? So he tells me this story where I think this was on a Friday, that on the Monday of that week, he was fired. And he had a pretty senior job. He was there a while. Normally, I'd say he'd be entitled to a reasonable severance payment, probably a couple $100,000. So he tells me the story and says he was fired and he was offered $50,000. And he said, well, he went back to the company 3 hours later and said, listen, I've talked to Harris and this claim is worth way more than 50. I'll settle for 200,000, as Harris tells me I'm entitled to. Never seen me. And they said, oh, we'll get back to you. So next morning they come back and said, all right, we're going to offer you 100. 2 hours later, he goes back and says, talk to Harris again, and we'll take 175 for a deal, and that's it, or we're going to sue tomorrow. Company comes back again and says, all right, we've changed our mind. We're going to offer you $150,000. And he said, yeah, that's great. What about my legal fees? And they said, we're going to give you $5,000 for legal fees. And he said, that's how I got the $5,000 check in your name. I said, the story's worth $5,000, but I said, I don't think I can take it. He said, well, the problem now is if I go back to the company, I got to tell them why you can't take it, and then I lied to them, and I'm going to be in big trouble. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll take the $5,000, and next week we'll have a staff party. Bring your wife and friends, and the story will be well worth the party. And we agreed, and that was the easiest $5,000 I ever saw.